There you go.
Welcome, and thanks for joining us today. My name is Angela. I'm a child protection specialist with KidCheck, and I'm here today with Alex Smith, the founder and CEO of KidCheck.
Good morning, good afternoon.
And we are excited to be able to talk with you about securing your children's area. And we just want to thank you for all those that are interested in improving safety for children. We know that there's a lot of you out there today from all different kinds of industries. We've got ministries, we've got gyms, we've got aftercare programs, schools. So we're just really grateful that you're here.
Yeah, thank you very much for taking time just to spend with us. So a couple of housekeeping things before we get started. The first one is I just to let you guys know, I'm coming off of a head cold of head colds. It knocked me down for almost a solid week. And so, so I have my hot tea here, and I've got I just finished off my last Ricola. No ad there, but
there you go.
Anyway, so if I have to excuse myself for a moment to cough or whatever, you guys will understand why. So I just appreciate the grace in there. The other thing I need a little bit of grace with as well is the problem with getting up in the morning and having to dress yourself in the dark is that sometimes you don't make the best, at least for me, I don't make the best
fashion choices,
best wardrobe choices. So, considering that I was going to be on camera today, I don't know if you can tell, my shirt has got a very small crosshatch pattern on it. So if you are prone to like epileptic seizures, I apologize up front. So
don't look at this. Don't look at the shirt.
That's right. But on a more serious note, we do have a very wide array of different customers and prospects in different verticals that are with us today. So, the slide deck that we put together, we really wanted to focus on a lot of very practical information, things that you can look at your facility and how you're handling childcare, and be able to kind of evaluate what you're doing in the best light. So, okay.
Oh, I was just going to say the 6 topics that we'll cover are really broad-based topics that should be included in any safety plan. And one thing to keep in mind is that safety plans are pretty extensive and they're unique to every organization. So what we present today will be lots of good information that you can apply individually to your unique organization. And we will have upcoming webinars on employee and volunteer screening and policy. We'll also have an upcoming webinar on predator proofing your organization, things like that. That information should, of course, be included in your overall safety plan, but we just aren't able to cover that today. So I hope that helps in setting us up. And if you want to go ahead and kick it off.
Yeah, that sounds great. So of all the different things, let me go back to the slide deck here. Of all the different things we're going to talk about today, looking at everything on here is, again, designed to be kind of cross-platform to a variety of different industries. But we'll kind of call out different things if you're, specifically like a church, for example. We have a lot of information specific to that. If we've got some daycare stuff, we'll talk about that. But there's definitely, tips and tricks you can kind of pull out of each one of those things.
Absolutely. And if you have a question that we're not addressing, please go ahead and put that in the comments. We're going to do Q&A at the end. We have Alyssa Reed from KidCheck, who's actually going to be monitoring our chat and helping us sort of manage those questions. So please feel free to put those in the chat, and we'll try to hit those at the end.
Sounds great. Okay, so we're going to kick off with just a couple of statistics, and you can kind of take a look at the slides and read through sort of the outline of where we're at in terms of the threat that faces all of us. If you're in the childcare industry, if you're watching kids, there's a lot of different components that you need to be aware of, and a lot of people are sort of shocked by some of these statistics. And it's not really, we don't put these up here to shock you, but just to really kind of highlight the idea of childcare safety and becoming a childcare safety expert is something that we don't spend a lot of time talking about in the industry, but it's something that is just critically important because it is very pervasive, much more pervasive than we typically give it credit for.
And we're starting to see a lot of trends that are changing where what used to be a nice to have in terms of safety planning and child protection is now imperative. Mm-hmm. Parents are becoming a lot more educated and asking the right questions and expecting organizations where they leave their children and then come to retrieve them to be, up on the latest information and to have a plan in place. and to have that plan communicated.
Yeah.
So,
and one of the things that we, just kind of as a society have not done a very good job at is really preparing folks that are responsible for kids
Right.
to provide for the safety and security of the kids that are in their care. So we totally recognize that, and so we want to talk about some of the biggest things you can do to really impact the safety and security of your facility. So we're going to talk for a moment here about looking at security teams, and security teams is one of those things that is, again, very applicable mostly to a church type of a scenario. So if you guys are, if you're working at a commercial organization that
employs.
that employs folks, this may not be directly applicable to you, but one of the things that I do want to recommend and call out is one of the most important things you can do is really connect with your local law enforcement resources. So, excuse me. Reaching out to your, the local police department, asking them to come in, take a look at your facility, making sure that you have that connection so they know where you are, physically located and where you're at. I can't stress that enough. I used to be a police officer, back in a previous life. It feels like forever ago.
Long time ago.
But I don't know of any law enforcement officials or department that wouldn't love the community reaching out to them, saying, "Hey, help me become a better agency and be able to protect the kids that are within my reach." So,
and the other interesting thing about security teams is that we're also starting to see a lot of nonprofits and ministries actually bring on someone or have hired staff or procure outside resources to help them develop security teams.
Sure.
So we're seeing a lot more of that than we ever used to.
Yeah, absolutely. So as Angela and I have gone around the country and shared a lot of this information over the last probably 7-8 years, something like that, long time.
Oh, goodness.
It's been awesome to see the numbers of churches and organizations that have a lot of volunteers in them really embracing the security team idea. And we definitely want to talk about if your organization doesn't have a security team, this is a really, really good thing to kind of stand up and fight for. I guarantee you, in a large group of people, there are going to be police officers or military personnel that are trusted, that can stand up and actually help build that infrastructure for you, so you don't have to become necessarily the security expert overnight.
Exactly.
You can leverage the resources that are already within your organization.
And they're just such a great buffer for any sort of confrontational, situation that may happen. They're really your go-to people to help you to be able to prevent if there's a custody situation.
Yeah, any kind of escalation issue.
Anything.
Yeah.
And so they're really a great resource for those who are directing child and youth organizations.
Yeah, and there's definitely right ways and wrong ways to build security teams, and we've seen and experienced both of these. So if you are an organization that is interested in this, that doesn't have a security team put together, and you want to look at this, as you're talking with the rest of the staff team, make sure that you kind of approach it from the right angle. So what you don't want to do, if you're going to go build your security team, you don't want to go advertise in the like the Sunday bulletin, "Hey, we're looking for volunteers for the security team," because you're going to end up with like a variety of different folks, people that want to play sort of armchair Rambo on Sunday morning. Like, yeah, I got a gun, I can come out and volunteer, and it's definitely the wrong way to kind of approach that. You really want to think about professionalism.
Yes.
Folks that have experience and that are really well trusted within the church itself. Folks that can blend into the background so that they don't necessarily need to advertise their presence, but can be there and stand in the gap, in a moment's notice.
And what's interesting too is I've seen some of the professional organizations who go into churches and really support the development of the security team. They do a lot more on the tactical side now. Mm-hmm. So it's like they take them from two different perspectives: the strategy piece and then the tactical training. And that's a really great thing to see, because I don't think we can have one without the other anymore.
Yeah, absolutely. So as you're building your team, the right way to do that is to really identify sort of that trusted, person with law enforcement background or military background that the staff is comfortable with, and then let them build the team. Make sure that they can identify folks that are going to serve well and be faithful to that role. But overall, you want to make sure that you also have good equipment for the security team and within the the childcare area, so that having good radios is really essential. If there was an issue, if you have a custody problem that steps up, or any kind of a security issue, you can get them on the radio and get them over to where the problem is very, very quickly. So you don't have to necessarily be the person that is going to stand in that confrontation with the angry parent. You want to be able to have those guys there so that you can leverage them so that they can do that, because they're trained in how to de-escalate things. They're trained in how to handle those kinds of situations.
It's very true.
So one resource to take a look at, so there's a website here in the bottom, cppssite.com. This is actually a group it's a commercial group up in Fairchild, Fairchild Air Force Base. They actually go out and they do training nationally for all kinds of different organizations, universities, and large companies. They do churches and schools and all that kind of stuff. But it's the CPPS is the Center for Personal Protection and Safety. And these guys have a ton of resources to help whatever type of organization you are, in terms of training and just thinking through those security pieces. That can kind of help security teams to if you're just a local gym with one person standing behind the counter, they've got resources to kind of help match all of those things.
And they have such an incredible library of videos. And the videos are short, they're really informative, and usually if they don't have something to share, they're really great about getting back to people on resources of where they can go and find their answers. Yeah,
and it's everything from like the worst case active shooter type scenario all the way down to how to stand in and de-escalate a situation when it's just somebody that's upset about something. So and everything in between. So they really do have a lot of great resources there. So so once you have sort of your security team or security strategy identified, one of the things that is really, really critical is making sure that you are well connected with that group of people. So, because they are going to be your right-hand man, they are going to be there to stand in the gap when something doesn't go right. So a couple of different thoughts about how to stay connected with those folks. Make sure that you know who's on the team. Make sure that you've got at least a some level of personal relationship with them. And then think about ways to kind of connect, your team as, childcare providers with your security team. So there's just a couple of suggestions that we have down here. If you're doing like annual CPR training, for example, it's a great opportunity to bring both teams together, have some fun outside of the normal responsibilities. When you're thinking about like emergency planning, we'll talk about that here in a couple of minutes. But developing those plans with them so everybody knows what to do, and then walk through those plans and make sure that everybody understands what their roles are, what's going to happen if if the fire alarm gets pulled, what's going to happen if there's a medical problem, where are people going to go, and how are people going to remain safe. And then again, if you're in a church type scenario where your security team may have a very wide array of different roles that they're going to fulfill, make sure that the team has got somebody dedicated to that children's area. Or at least somebody that can be very close at hand. So when something does come up, you can leverage them.
It's a great idea. We've also heard people share that they've been asked to be included if there's a monthly meeting or something like that, so that the teams can be in constant communication with each other. Right. So just sort of bridging that engagement gap, I think is really smart. Yeah. All right, so let's talk about facilities for a moment. This is a little bit of a tricky topic because the facilities that you are in is the facility that you're in, and unless you have the budget to go build a new facility, or if there is a new facility going up, chances are you're probably sort of stuck with what you got. And unfortunately, a lot of times, the facilities that we have kids in are not necessarily thought through from a security standpoint. Correct. So
traditionally. In a church type scenario, we put a lot of the kids in the back, for example. We want them to kind of, out of sight, out of mind, or just keep the noise level to a minimum. But then again, in gyms and daycares, obviously those types of facilities are, way up in the front. But oftentimes, again, not, there's the thought of security isn't necessarily forefront in your mind. But there are things that we can do to kind of help improve the physical security within your facility. So a couple of things to think about. If you have a choice, you definitely want to make sure that anytime you're watching kids, that the locations that you're watching kids in is definitely up front and visible. Right. The whole idea of you want to maintain as much accountability as possible and reduce the isolation that kids may have. That's sort of the overarching theme of security is reducing that isolation. So if you can, again, highly visible areas is what you're looking for. And that can include things like, if the rooms have windows or doors, you want to try and keep the doors open, again, so that people can at least see through the door and kind of make sure, that there's visibility going on with what's happening inside the classroom. Now, you may have to use child gates on the doors just to make sure that, because everybody has that one escape artist that they're, that's always in their care. Yeah, that's gonna make a run for the outside.
That's right.
So the child gates are a great, inexpensive way to kind of maintain that visibility, but also maintain control, and then also making sure you've got the right number of volunteers or employees with the kids. So having something can kind of measure, what your normal attendance is like, and kind of help you plan for those, timed spikes in the number of kids you may have, so that you can staff accordingly, is really, really important.
And a couple of other things too that I've seen recently that I thought were great is, this time of year is a great time of year to go through and check all of your fire detection.
Sure.
Like upgrading your batteries, replacing your light bulbs, making sure that if there's any debris or boxes or anything in the exit areas, clearing that out. Just making sure that the facility is, in case of an incident, clear, that the right response can take place without minimal disruption.
Yeah, if there is an emergency or something that comes up, that you can safely get kids in and out is really important.
And I like the way that you highlight limiting the entry points to the children's area. So making them visible, but really limiting where and how people can get access to those areas.
Yeah. So, and kind of the worst case scenario, if you're looking at your facility, if a parent can kind of walk into a room that just has kids in it, so they basically have direct access to kids, that's really that's kind of a bad idea. At the very minimum, you want to have a desk with a gate in it, or something like that kind of provides some level of physical barrier. Or if you're a church, again, like a pickup and drop off area that has volunteers there that can really kind of control that access to individual classrooms, and also just kind of funneling those entry points so that people can't just enter the area without authorization.
Right. That's great.
So the best way to kind of handle that is when you, and again, this is a very broad overarching topic, but if you look at your overall facility, and you just look at it through the lens of kind of that worst case scenario, just kind of look at it objectively, saying like, where are the issues going to be, and how do I control the flow of people through here?
Right.
That's a great place to start. And then there's actually some inexpensive things you can do to help control that facility, and
especially
those
if you're
points.
in a rented facility or a facility that you can't really make any changes to the structure.
So these are a couple of things that we found, just very inexpensive things we found on Amazon. You have the belted stanchions like you have at the bank. Those are, I think those are like $40 or $50, for a stanchion. And the nice thing is you can, because it's very quick and easy to set those belts up, you can put that up, in a moment's notice and control the flow of people. And obviously, it's not going to physically control the flow of people, but it'll highlight, if somebody's on the wrong side of that stanchion, you can identify them
Makes
really
it very
quickly.
visible, very quickly.
And it allows you to respond, hey, can I help you? And, just kind of help them get pointed in the right direction. If you need something that's a little bit more substantial, you have these flexible panels. And the nice thing is these are acoustic absorbing panels. They have like a carpet material on the front that helps kind of knock some of the noise down. But again, very easy to set up and tear down. Doesn't require any kind of building modifications. Right. You can just set those up and again control that flow. Yeah. So let's talk about check-in for a moment. So obviously this is something that's near and dear to our hearts.
Yeah.
And really when we kind of looked at KidCheck overall, one of the things that really stood out to us is there's a number of systems out there that are really designed to take attendance on the kids that are in your care, but that may not necessarily be the right approach. And with KidCheck, we really kind of focused on this being a security platform. Where it's really about making sure that you have up-to-date information, that information sharing is really fast, and that you know exactly who's in your facility and what to do in case of an emergency and all those kinds of things. So we just kind of put together a couple of questions to kind of look at your existing system, whether it's pen and paper or a different electronic platform, and look at it to say, like, hey, can parents update their information online? If they update their information at their church, does the gym get it as well? Those are really important things to look at. Can anybody just enter a phone number and pull up somebody else's account, or are there security pieces in place to help prevent an unauthorized person from coming in and checking out a child, for example? And then make sure that the system that you're looking at, you can continue check-in in case of an emergency. So if you have to move kids, if there's some kind of an internet outage or a power outage, or if you have to evacuate because somebody pulled the fire pole or something like that, can you maintain that level of security during that emergency?
So when you're done chatting about check-in and how important it is, we had a question come in from Rob Phipps, and we may want to tackle that a little bit when you're done.
Okay.
He's asking about ratios. And, Rob asks, what resource is the best legal reference for adequate adult to child ratios? I've seen different numbers. Would it be preschool, daycare, state laws? That's a fantastic question. And we actually have some updated information out on our blog under current staffing ratios. And a lot of people do go by their state education standards. That's what they tackle. But there are some age of children and number of workers, number of children sort of tables out there to help you, Rob, with that. So if you get a moment, you may check on out there. Like an example would be birth to 1 year old. We've got numbers of workers, 1 to 2 children. Then when we go into the older children, we have 5 and older. We're looking at 1 resource to 5 children. So I hope that helps you with your question if we weren't able to get to that at the end, but that is out on the KidCheck blog, and that's kidcheck.com/blog. And you can just type in ratios and it'll pull it right up for you.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great question. And a lot of times too with things like worker ratios, a lot of that is dependent upon your insurance as well. So sometimes your insurance companies will have requirements for certain age kids, and a lot of that is based on how easy it is to evacuate children. If you have, like infants, for example,
correct.
A lot of times they'll say like you need to have 1 worker per 2 children because you need to, you have 2 arms so that worker can grab kids in case there was an emergency and get them out.
And I think it's really important to note too, with your check-in system, you need to be able to have that roster.
Yes.
That ability to see how many children are in each classroom. That the simple attendance tracking doesn't really help in evacuation situations or when you're in lockdown. You need that information both for yourself as well as for your security team.
Yep.
So making sure that everyone has a clear view of how many adult to children are within each area.
And can you pull it up on your phone? So in case there was a power outage or an internet outage, you still have live real-time information about, where the kids are, who's in your care, and who are the appropriate people to check those kids out to.
And I love the sort of evolution of check-in and check-out and how we've watched it just sort of change over the years from being simply an attendance tracking tool to something that actually provides people managing children the information they need to make safety calls.
Yep, absolutely.
That I think is so helpful. So I just wanted to interject there a little bit.
That's great.
And share about.
That's great. All right, this is my favorite slide. This is let's talk about medical emergencies for a second here.
I know, I love this
This
slide.
young man is my son, who actually he's about ready to turn 17 years old now. I can't even believe it. But medical emergencies with kids, they just happen. This incident that you're looking at with a couple of pictures here, this happened when I was actually working on a security team with my church. And my son was running around inside the building. They have one large room. It's a pretty big area that these kids can kind of run around and play in. And there's one pole in the middle of that room, and it's the pole here over on the left there. And you'll notice the pole has a fresh wound right in the middle of it, and my son has a fresh wound right between his eyes. And for whatever reason, he thought it would be awesome to run full speed. He was probably making faces
into
at
the
somebody.
only pole in the whole room.
I can just picture like as he's turning that last second, it just runs right into that pole. So they called me out as I was working on the security team, and by then the tears were gone. He was kind of laughing and joking, and we took some pictures of the incident, which again, another great safety tip when there is an incident, because there will be. Make sure you take lots of pictures about it,
Yes.
lots of documentation, and have a central place to store all of that.
Digitally,
Yes.
because that is really important information to keep for a bit.
Yep. But the one thing that really stood out to me about this particular incident is that nobody knew where the first aid kit was. So if his forehead didn't bleed, thankfully, but had it, we would have been in real trouble, because we all kind of went scurrying around trying to find, like, where's the first aid kit, and nobody had any idea. There was like 20 of us that were all standing around trying to figure this out, and it turns out they found it the next week. It was in a locked filing cabinet in one of the classrooms. So the lesson learned there was make sure that you have a first aid kit, and that it's well stocked, and you go through it periodically, because a lot of times they have expiration dates on different things that may be in there. But make sure that it's clearly marked. So in fact, I think on the next slide here, yeah. So here's like the first aid kit sign. This is a little plastic sign you can buy on Amazon for
$3.
a couple bucks.
Yeah.
This would have been really handy to have up on the wall, so that everybody could see it and knew exactly where that first aid kit was and how to access it. So please make sure you've got a good first aid kit in place. The second thing that is really important, thinking about medical emergencies, is make sure that you have a method in place for identifying allergies on a per child basis. So, food allergies especially have definitely become much more pervasive now than at least they were when I was a kid. And so, if you are an organization that you are allowing kids to have snacks, or feeding kids goldfish crackers or whatever it is as part of your childcare, make sure that again, parents can alert you some way, whether that's a sticker that they put on the child, or again through your check-in system that can clearly identify those kids. And then make sure that you're communicating back to the parents about what snacks are going to be served, so that, again, it provides that second level where you don't necessarily have to check every single child. The parent can alert you, like, oh, hey, yeah, please give the snack that I brought instead of whatever it is that you may be providing.
And you had a suggestion at one time about having the whiteboard outside of the room. I thought that was just such a great and helpful suggestion. Can you share that?
Yeah, we had a daycare customer that just decided, like, for snacks, they're going to put it on a whiteboard, a little dry erase board right on the outside of the classroom doors, so that as a parent were to go drop off that child, it's really, really easy to identify, like, okay, yeah, they're going to be doing, like a peanut cracker, for example, so that a parent, if the child had a peanut allergy, could just alert whoever the employee was right there, like, hey, this please don't do that.
And it's so helpful, once again, having that information accessible mobily, so that you can, if there's any question whether or not a child has consumed something, or, done a project with something that they could be allergic to, you could immediately look it up on your phone and see the profile and what their allergies were.
Get alerted right away.
Absolutely.
Yep. So, and again, not if, but when there is an incident. Correct. Again, because these are children we're talking about. Again, make sure you can document it, or that you do document it. Take lots of photos, store it in a central place, so that you can access it in case there's any questions that come up about that particular incident. And then if you're going to be, if you're doing any kind of activity or something outside of the norm, or keeping children overnight, for example, make sure that you get medical releases from parents, and again, have a place to store those digitally. So that way, if there is an incident and a child needs medical care, you can take them right to that care provider and get them treated right away. Well, then you can pull up the release information on your phone, or use a computer at the clinic or wherever you have to take them. So it's better to get the kid or the child to medical help, and then worry about the finding the documentation necessarily, than having them wait as you kind of have to look through your own stuff. So.
We did get a question from Sarah, and she asks, you talk about medical releases from parents. We do this for big events, but not Sunday school. Should we have a different one for Sunday school?
That really is going to depend on your organization. So you can do a quick consent for medical release, basically as part of the check-in process. We actually have that built into KidCheck as well. A lot of places, a lot of organizations don't require that because, again, it's going to be a very short duration. But it's really going to come down to looking at what your insurance requirements are, especially if you're a large church, for example.
And we had another question from Leslie, who asked, when you were talking about back on check-in that we didn't get, she's got 9 to 12 kids.
Okay.
Do you still feel that check-in should be required?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's, I don't want to just say that off the cuff, but even with a small group of people, the challenge is you can't know everything about everybody. In terms of knowing, what relatives can pick up a child and who can act as a guardian in case there was a problem, who shouldn't be, you don't necessarily know about, Uncle Billy's, his prison record, for
Correct.
example, or something like that. So there's a lot of information that we kind of take for granted, even on a small group of people that's in that, a dozen kids or so range, that you really should know. Right. So I think it's really important, and it just helps maintain security, but also helps provide you with a lot of liability coverage, just to make sure that you've got all those pieces in place.
I also think that's one interesting trend that we've seen over the last couple of years too, is the increase in technology, no matter the size of the organization or where they're focused. We've seen technology being used in very small, sort of just startup organizations, but it helps to increase efficiency. It helps with improving security. It gives, parents peace of mind. So we really are starting to see that use of technology, even in these small organizations, which I think is great.
I think even parents, as we become more technologically savvy, a lot of young parents are expecting some level of, technology and proficiency within the organization. So it's important both from a security standpoint as well as just an outreach to those folks.
Absolutely.
So, and then lastly, you want to make sure that your volunteers and staff are trained in CPR. Right. And there's a ton of resources. If you haven't done this already, there's if you're a larger organization, there's probably somebody in your organization that's already set up as a trainer. But if not, reach out to your local Red Cross. They have some great resources to get folks trained up on CPR, and they can even do small child CPR as well. So really a really good thing. Even if folks are already certified in it, it's just a great thing to kind of do like annually or even biannually, just to make sure that people have been refreshed in terms of the the process and can sing that "Staying Alive" song a couple more times.
That's right.
So yeah,
that's right.
Absolutely. Okay, so we talked about, the kind of the first aid kit signs, if you will. Another one that I wanted to point out here, this is actually a sign that's off of an AED device. Again, this is from Amazon, a couple bucks. But when you're thinking about CPR, this is just another great visual reminder about what the steps are and procedures are for CPR. So really handy thing just to kind of have hung up on a wall someplace in case there was an emergency. It doesn't cost very much. But it can really help save somebody in case there was an emergency.
The more signage, the better.
Absolutely.
I love that visual sort of connection with information.
Yeah, and it's during an emergency, people naturally tend to blank out or kind of panic.
Correct.
And so having something that kind of goes, oh wait, no, you know how to do this. Let's just go through the steps. That's a huge help. I
would agree.
Okay, so let's talk about emergency planning. So one of the things that never works well in an emergency plan is to develop the plan during the emergency. This is it's the worst time to do this. So thinking about what we're going to do with these kids that we're in charge of while something is going on, you want to make sure you do that ahead of time. This is a great opportunity. Again, if you're a church organization and you have a security team, this is something you want to develop with them. But you want to talk through any kind of natural disaster. So fire, flood, hurricanes, tornadoes, wherever you may be, whatever the issues are. Absolutely. What are we going to do with these kids in those cases? We need to evacuate the building. We need to seek shelter. And what is that going to look like? You also want to think through any kind of medical emergency. So if somebody had a problem, where do we need to transport them somewhere? Do we need to take them somewhere? Where is help going to come from? Where are the first responders going to be? The fire trucks, are we going to have them roll up front, or that kind of thing. So it's important to think through all of those different pieces so that everybody knows what the plan is.
There's a lot of details.
There's a lot of things to think about.
A lot of details to consider and to think about. So what would you say to somebody who feels overwhelmed by the amount of details that go into just the emergency planning. Because I mean, people hear us speak, and I know the intentions are always good, but sometimes it's a little overwhelming to get started and to go down that road.
I think first thing to consider is every step that you take toward better safety and security is a really positive step. So just take one step at a time.
Sure.
So when you're thinking through like an emergency plan, for example, it's easy just to kind of say, all right, let's just think through natural disasters. You have things, weather-related disasters. If I have hail outside or a tornado or something like that, okay, we need to shelter, and what does that look like? Versus, we've got a fire in the building or a flood of some kind. So, just kind of, first thing you want to do is sort of simplify all those different pieces and just take one step at a time. The second thing that I would recommend, and we're gonna show you guys this here in just a second. KidCheck's actually developed a little, it's kind of a boilerplate flip book that you can use to help kind of almost operate as like a boilerplate in terms of developing that plan. What are we gonna do in these different scenarios and situations? So we'll jump to that slide here in just a second to kind of show you guys that. But that's a downloadable resource you can download and print off, and we'll talk about how to utilize that. But just thinking through those things, just trying to grab as many resources as you can. So, making sure that as you kind of go through and develop your plan, you really want to talk through, here's exactly how everybody's going to react, and here's exactly what's going to happen, when we have to enact this plan. If you're a smaller organization, being able to, again, reach out to your local resources, your local, fire department, your local police department, and work with them in terms of the plan, that's hugely helpful. Because again, if there was a medical emergency and you've already talked to the local fire department, hey, we need you guys to roll in over here to kind of to provide assistance to this type of an injury or something like that. Again, that they will be very appreciative of that, and they may be able to offer additional suggestions in terms of how to tweak things and how to improve things. So,
well, they're always looking at ways to improve their response time.
Yep.
So
absolutely.
By working with them initially to set up those strategies and plans, that helps them with response, which in the end could, in some situations, save a life.
Absolutely. The other thing to consider, there's a whole host of great resources available for emergency planning. I know the CDC offers some downloads, the Centers for Disease Control, that they have some emergency plan, again, boilerplates that you can download and look at, and then kind of tweak them to make them your own. But it just provides, again, those key points that you may not necessarily be thinking of right off the get-go. So a lot of people have thought a lot about how to do all these things, and sometimes these plans can get really comprehensive. I know that I looked at one that I think was for Stanford University, and it had to be probably 80 pages long. Yeah. It was incredibly detailed about all different types of scenarios and different things to do. But again, just keep it simple and just do one step at a time.
And find that balance between going overboard with the detail and going too vague.
Right.
Because, a lot of this is we want to just remove the gray area.
Right.
We want to understand, we want to be able to train. And so just really finding that balance that people can understand and apply, I think is really a key when you're doing emergency planning.
Let me see if I can find those flip books here really quick. Here we go. So the KidCheck Emergency Flip Book, this is actually, I got this idea from, actually it was a corporate customer that had this set up. And what they did was inside of each one of their conference rooms, they had these little flip books that were pinned up on the wall. You can kind of see it up over in the picture here. This is our little flip book, and it's probably maybe 10 or 11 inches long. It's basically an 8.5 by 11 sheet that's all kind of cut up into these little flip out sections. And the idea is that if there is an incident, whether it's like a medical emergency or a fire or some kind of security issue, you can basically flip that book open to that particular section, and it'll walk you through, okay, here's the 6 things that you need to do to kind of handle this situation. So again, it's the idea being that we all tend to kind of blank out and freeze or panic, unless we have been really, really well trained. So a volunteer that may not necessarily have that training, they can open up that flip book and reference exactly that procedure and go, okay, great, I know exactly how to react now at this point. So very simple, very inexpensive, and very practical. And the actual template for all of these is available on our website. You can go download those.
So all this information on this flipbook is customizable.
Yes.
So that people can sort of adjust it to their
Yep.
organizations.
Yep.
And I always like it. Will you talk, I can't ever remember the name of it, but you used this amazing paper to print these on. And that paper is indestructible. It could go through fire, flood, and all kinds of things.
Sure.
Can you tell them a little bit about that paper?
Yeah, so the paper is called Teslin, and it's actually a plasticized paper. It kind of feels a little bit slippery, but you can write on it, and it's just like a normal sheet of paper, and it's Teslin is the name of it. You can cut it with scissors, but you cannot tear it. I can't tear it. It is really pretty amazing stuff. So what I did, I have a sample flipbook that I had made, and as we're traveling across the country, they kind of get torn up and that kind of stuff. So I made one out of Teslin, and that thing is it's
indestructible.
It's amazing. I think they make black boxes on airplanes out of this stuff. It's pretty incredible. So yeah, if you're looking for something that's a little bit stronger than normal paper, Teslin is available on Amazon. It's not expensive. You can just buy it in regular sheets. You run it through your laser printer, just like regular paper, and off you go.
That's great.
One of the other things that's on this flipbook, in the picture here, you can kind of notice there's a little green stripe across the very bottom. And the very last page on that flipbook is a green, it's basically like a big green card that just says safe on it. And then there's another one that's red behind it that says, I think it says help. And the idea being that if there was an emergency where you had to shelter in place
yes.
and you wanted to communicate back out to folks that no, everybody's okay in here. For example, you can just use that little green card to say safe, or like, no, if there's something really serious going on, you can just use the put the red thing up against the window so folks know that you need help.
Those are very handy. Looks like we got to get moving.
Okay.
Because people want Q&A and lockdown procedures. I get to talk about those now. So really quickly, lockdown procedures is a very big topic, and there's all kinds of different ways to approach it and systems. But today, I just want to give you kind of a very high-level overview of what those procedures should look like. Oftentimes there's confusion as to when lockdown procedures apply. So really, we look at this as an emergency procedure, and anytime in your proximity of your campus or your organization where there's an immediate threat both in or outside of the building, a lockdown procedure can, for your organization, include one building or several buildings. But this procedure, what I have found over the years, is extremely unique to each and every organization, whether you're a daycare, a church, a gym, whatever it looks like, that procedure should be unique to you. So a couple of communication codes that I've found on the education side that seem to be really simple and straightforward. You've got stay put. This is letting people know there's no threat, that they may have heard something or seen something, but there's no threat. Secured the perimeter. This one is letting people know that there's danger close by. And it could be within the facility, it could be outside the facility, a block down, just letting people know. And then lockdown is really where you tell people we're activating our procedure. We are shutting doors when we are locking it down. And that's kind of the code red. I've also seen, some communication codes that go by color. I've seen one by number, but these were the ones that to me seemed the easiest to understand.
And I love this because not every single incident that you have to lock down for is a really significant issue. It could just be, hey, there's a tornado coming through, so everybody just stay put, for example, where it's not a dire emergency, but it's just there's an increased amount of awareness that you want to bring to the folks that are in your facility.
Right. Can we go on to the next slide? Thank you. So just really quickly, I just want to highlight, we often get the question, well, who actually initiates the lockdown when you have to go to that? We often identify either administrators, law enforcement, office staff, a security director, a manager, whomever is in sort of the responsibility of the overall organization. So what really happens during that procedure? And once again, as Alex mentioned, it really depends on the classification. Oftentimes there is danger within the proximity, but it doesn't require a full lockdown. Could be something like a gas leak.
Sure.
Or something along those lines. So the procedures differ, but knowing that, in a full lockdown procedure, your exterior and interior doors and windows are going to be locked. Making sure that people understand no one is to enter or exit the building. Right. I think sometimes that gets confusing, especially for parents in situations where their children are in lockdown. I know I've been through a couple of lockdowns, and it's difficult to help them to understand that they can't retrieve their child at that point. Lockdown means nobody enters or exits the building. And
honestly, this is a great way to utilize, again, a check-in system. If you have to go to lockdown and your system can communicate with all of your parents in real time, being able to alert them, hey, your child's in lockdown, for their safety, no one's allowed in or out. So there's just no question about what the procedure is, and a quick reminder that the parent that wants to come in and rescue their child because they think they're in imminent danger, they're going to cause a situation to become worse by acting counter to the actual lockdown.
And actually, that brings up a good point. Can you go to the next slide? Because when we talk about the checklist this is kind of the down and dirty list of what you should always have for your procedures. Confirm parents are informed on the process and the procedure. I cannot stress how important that communication is to parents, just simply because as parents, we like to know what our job and role is, sure, if it happens, what we should do, where we should go, and so having that available and that knowledge. We've seen that expansion of communication, over the last couple of years, where we're starting to bring in families and guardians and educate them on what those procedures look like for the organizations. Also, reviewing, training with staff, familiarizing children with the process without terrorizing them is always a great way, just talking about it and sure, when scenarios would happen and things like that. Always continue to, operate and open the facility to your local resources. I mean, we've already talked about that. And then, and just discuss the topic so that so everybody knows a little bit about what's going on.
Yeah,
I think that just really helps.
And I think it's really important to recognize that a lockdown procedure really kind of goes hand in hand again with that evacuation procedure.
Correct.
It's just when you're looking at scenarios as part of your emergency plan that says, okay, it is safer to remain indoors than actually to remove the kids back out. So that lockdown procedure, whether, depending on the classification, can really kind of control, the reaction that you need to have.
But keeping in mind, they're all unique. I mean, I've seen
sure,
hundreds of different lockdown procedures based on facility design and location and
And again, there's tons of boilerplates out there
right,
that you can look at.
Lots of resources.
Say, okay, here's our, the shelter in place is the one that I've seen, the most frequently. So you can go find that and take a look and say, like, okay, what does that procedure look like? And then tweak it for your facility and your staff level.
Absolutely.
Okay, so let's talk about working with your executive team. So we talked about a lot of different things in this presentation. One of the things that can be the most difficult is to kind of help implement change within your organization through your executive team. Because a lot of times folks, if they're not paying attention or they're not necessarily thinking through the security implications of their organization, of your organization, it may be hard to to kind of dedicate resources and money and that kind of thing to make sure that you've got a really comprehensive security plan in place. So a couple of things just to kind of keep in mind when you're working with your executive team or your senior staff to kind of help implement some of those changes. The first thing is, this tends to be a very emotional topic for folks.
Absolutely.
Keeping kids safe, that's a big deal. But one of the most important things to do is to, if you're presenting this information, try and leave that emotion at the door. We're trying to kind of make like a logical argument that kind of goes through and says, okay, we really need to put these pieces in place. I need, $200 for these things or whatever it may be. So having lots of information and lots of data to be able to present to an executive team to make it almost like a business decision. Says, hey, the best way to protect our organization and reduce liability and risk in our organization is to do these things. That helps a lot because if you can kind of paint a picture of sort of what the threats are and how we're going to respond to those threats, and here are the things that I need to do, that makes it really easy to make that decision. It just becomes like, of course. In fact, you can have $500 instead of $200. So.
Wouldn't that be nice?
Making sure that you've kind of taken a look at an overarching plan, and part of your plan that you would bring to an executive team may be, hey, we need to put together a plan.
Right.
So it's just identifying that those needs are there. Can again help bring light to that overall scenario.
And I also wanted to mention on this topic that on our blog, I know I keep referring to this, but there is a post about gaining leadership buy-off and support. And it kind of walks you through step by step of some of the things, some of the key points to really take into account when you are presenting to your board or your leadership team or upper management or whatever that looks like. So we do have that information out there for you to sort of help guide your conversation.
Absolutely. Okay, so a couple of things to remember, just in summary, really when you're looking at overall security, complacency is the biggest overarching enemy to helping keep kids safe. Just assuming that our facility is good, our training is good, everything's great. I don't need to pay any attention to this. That's like the biggest enemy overall.
Or it won't happen here. We know all of our.
I know all the parents.
I know everybody. We're good. We're safe.
Yeah. It's being able to look at things constructively through that critical eye, just to say, how do I decrease isolation and increase accountability? Putting plans in place, making sure that you're thinking through things ahead of time, and then just getting help, reaching out and looking at some resources. In fact, we've got a whole bunch of resources we'll show here at the very end that you can utilize to make sure you've got those plans and things in place.
Absolutely.
So, I have this slide up here. Sometimes,
do people know who it is?
I think
would assume
so. Simon Cowell. If you remember the not America's Got Talent. He's on that show now, but I can't remember.
Correct. The one before that.
Yes.
Where that made him famous.
Yes.
That's right.
Anyway, sometimes you have to kind of channel your inner Simon Cowell and just be willing to kind of step up, whether it's talking with your executive team or talking with an angry parent, just being able to say I'm the one that's responsible for this child when they're in my care. Right. And so I need to fight for that and I need to advocate for that and just do what it takes to make sure you've got those pieces in place.
So shall we move on to the Q&A?
Yes, let's take a look at a couple of additional resources. I'll leave this slide up so that if you guys want to copy some of these websites down, we have tons of resources on our website. Angela she's the one that collects all the information and writes the articles for the blog, which you do an awesome job at, by the way.
Thank you very much.
So tons and tons of resources out there. So feel free to jump onto that. Plan to Protect and Stop It Now, both great abuse prevention sites. Lots of information there. Ready.gov is a U.S. government site, but it's all about emergency preparedness. Lots of good boilerplates out there for emergency plans and preparedness guides. And then again, the cppssite.com, which is the security team and security training group. So.
Okay, well, let's go to our first question. It comes from Tamra, and she asks, how do we access the medical release form that you have incorporated?
Yeah, so within KidCheck itself, and if you want to see this, you can certainly reach out to our support team or our sales team, and they can kind of show you this as well. But we have a profile section within KidCheck that you can pull up parents and kids, and there's a really comprehensive document management system in there as well. So you can take basically a release form or anything that you want to put on there, take a quick picture of it with your phone, for example, upload it to the site or scan it in on a scanner and upload it to the site. That way it's tied to that individual child. It can remain confidential so that other folks can't necessarily see it, but it's fully accessible anywhere that you've got internet access.
That's great. And our next question comes from Brianna, and she asks, do you guys have any tips on getting parents to actually use the check-in system? A lot of our parents just drop their kids off in our area and leave. I
think that really comes down to you. It's that having that policy and procedure in place that says, you have to have your kids checked in. And for example, like with KidCheck, if you're a church or a daycare, when you check the child in, the system will print off a sticker for the child and a guardian tag. And at the church that I was on the security team with, we actually had a security team member at the the door that you would drop the kids off at. And if they didn't have a sticker on, he would just direct them back to the check-in station that was right there. Please go check in. Or you can utilize the Express check-in app and parents can actually check in on their cell phone from home even, and not even it won't print off stickers or actually physically check them in until they get to your facility, but it gives them full control over that entire experience. So just easy ways to do that. Good question though.
Our next question comes from Denise, and she says, we have a small church and want to incorporate a check-in system. What should I look at as average prices, and how do you make the transition easy for parents and staff?
A lot of the transition, so a lot of times especially in a smaller organization, parents are oftentimes really behind, checking stuff. We've done a lot of trainings and events with folks, and parents get really excited about the idea of utilizing something like that. So check-in doesn't have to be expensive. I think, KidCheck starts off at $25 for a church. Excuse me. We've got tons of resources and videos on, training folks that you can run in bulletins or, show a video during a service or just to kind of announce the whole thing.
Right.
And then just showing folks how to use, actually use the system is really easy.
I love our parent resources and our rollout resources. I think those are fantastic. They've done such a great job, both with the videos and with all of the forms. And any sort of information you could need to help you roll this out to your parents and get staff comfortable with it.
Yeah. We have cute little explainer videos and all kinds of other stuff. So
lots of resources for you. So going to the next question, it comes from Chris. And the question is there any age when kids can check themselves in? Or should parents always check their kids in?
That's a really good question, and that's really going to depend on your organization and where you guys are comfortable. So a lot of times, I don't have a pat answer for that, but what I've seen in a lot of other organizations is typically like around about 6th grade or so, like when a child enters junior high, they kind of say like, all right, that child isn't necessarily required to be checked in because they can kind of fend for themselves for the most part. So it really is going to come down to how you want to do that. Though we have a number of customers that want to check kids in all the way through high school. Correct. And leverage that. So there's self check-in systems within KidCheck that allows students to do that, so they don't have to have a parent there. But again, it's just going to come down to probably a lot of it's going to be what your insurance company wants.
I was just going to say liability is huge in that because when parents, we've heard from other organizations that when parents just drop their kids, you're actually doing a transfer of liability for that child. And so in order to have all the information that they need to reduce any risk, they need to have a process in place for accepting the child and releasing them.
That's right.
So there is a huge liability.
So check with your insurance company on that first, but just that's kind of what we've seen overall.
Right. This next question comes from Desiree, and she says, how about name stickers? I'm in a gym setting, and we currently do not use stickers, and instead get our staff to do as much as possible to get those kiddos and names committed to memory. What are the pros and cons of the name tag sticker approach? And could you explain what that might look like?
Yeah, good question. So first of all, kudos on the whole going the extra mile to kind of identify parents and kids by name. I think that is absolutely fantastic from a relation standpoint. The KidCheck system, when you check in a kid, you can, as an option, have a label printer that'll print off a name badge for a child as well as a guardian receipt. Some of the big things that are important with those, the guardian receipt and the name tag have matching security codes that get printed off on both. They're not reused in the same day. There's like 15 million different codes that we can use. So, and the idea behind that is that when a parent comes back to check a child in or to check a child out, that as their childcare provider, you can just visually match up those codes to make sure like, yep, this is the correct person that I should be releasing this child to. So it's just another step to give the parents a real sense of comfort and peace of mind that somebody can't just walk in and say like oh yeah, I'm that child's dad or whatever, and have some kind of a mix-up happen. So parents generally really appreciate that to know that you've taken that extra step. And the stickers are really inexpensive.
Right.
So it's a very fast and easy way to do that. The sticker on the child has got a lot of detailed information just in terms of how it's printed, so that you can identify like, okay, this child has an allergy that I need to be aware of, for example. So the KidCheck system, it reverses the name so that you can see it's a white letters on a black background if they have an allergy. So from across the room, you can see like, okay, here's kids that are okay to hand snacks to, and this one I need to follow up with on the admin console, for example, just to see, can I do a snack or is it something else?
Also, we've encountered several custody issues.
Oh yeah.
Where employees will know the parents and the child, but there may be an ongoing custody situation where a parent is actually not allowed to have access to a child. Yep. And if that information is not available, we have had organizations that have released children to parents that didn't have custody at that time.
Because dad may walk up and the child says, "Daddy," and runs to the dad, and so then it's easy to assume like, "Hey, I shouldn't let this child go with this person," but that may not be the case. And we've actually seen a number of instances like that where KidCheck has kind of helped stand in the gap.
Correct.
Just to go like, no, this is mom's. It's mom's week. She's got her own guardian list that's active, not dad's.
And isn't there some sort of a symbol or something on the guardian tag that indicates there is a person that should not be picking up that child?
Yeah. Again, those stickers come in really handy for kids because you've got information like that on there, so you can identify really quickly that there may be a potential problem here.
So this is a really interesting question. This comes from Sarah, and she says, I've read a lot of churches not allowing parents back into classrooms. Is this the new normal? I've had problems with preschool parents that want to stay, and my pastor is fine with that. I think it disturbs the class and isn't safe. We are a small church.
Yeah, so this is, okay, that question, first of all, great question, and that is a loaded question.
Right.
A lot of different challenges in there. So, one of the things you need to think about is if you don't want to have parents back in the classroom, that's totally fine. And what I would recommend doing is looking at, well, first of all, I would attend your, child protection
child protection policy.
Yeah. So as you start building your child protection policy, some of the things you want to have in there are like, folks that have direct access to children need to have background checks completed. So if a parent says, hey, I want to drop off my child into your care and transfer custody, but stay in the room, they now have access to other people's children and they may not have a background check. So there's, some big risks that are associated with that, just from all different aspects.
Right.
So you want to really kind of think through those things. I know that the pastor wants to be accommodating to as many as possible, and that's very, very common in a church setting. But I think looking at a really comprehensive child protection policy can kind of help guide some of that and say, that we take, even though we're a small church, we're going to start thinking through those policies and procedures to make sure that folks, their kids are well taken care of because they're your responsibility as soon as you take custody of them. So I would advise caution on that just to kind of think through those scenarios. That may not be a good thing.
And we have seen organizations, especially churches, where anyone that's within the classroom is labeled. So if I'm a parent sitting with my child, I have a visitor lanyard or a visitor tag on a lanyard that's hanging around my neck and explaining to parents that you can only have contact with your child.
Right.
You can't have contact with the other children. But really calling out that visibility, letting people know that,
not
that's
labeled in a bad way.
Correct. But yeah, exactly.
Right.
But showing that this person is a visitor.
Yeah.
They're only there for, temporary. They don't have access to children. That way everybody knows who should and shouldn't be interacting with the larger group of kids.
Absolutely.
Well, it looks like we are out of time. We're 2 minutes over. I have one more question that came in. Maybe we can do it really fast. Go for it. This came from Carrie, and she mentioned, you said something about finding and adding consent forms or medical release under profile in KidCheck. Could you reiterate how to do this?
Yeah. So if you want to store, medical release information or document incidents or something like that, if you look up a given child in the people section within KidCheck, there is a notes section at the bottom of their profile list, and you can pull that up and you can actually just put in, just regular text notes about something that happened, or you can upload pictures or copies of medical release forms that parents have signed, for example. You can also mark all of those things as being available for other administrators to see, or maybe it's confidential that only you can see. That note section also maintains, if you run background checks through KidCheck, for example, those background checks will be contained inside those notes as well, so that you can reference those if you need to. And then for background checks, again, we recommend that you are periodically doing background checks for folks. So like every year or every other year, just making sure those are up to date. And again, those will all be in there. So it's in the people section. If you look up either a guardian or a child, it's at the notes in the bottom.
Awesome. So they want us to try to get through a couple more questions. So here comes one from Susanna. And She says, we don't have much opportunity for securing the area where children are. i.e. with stanchions or divider walls. What are your thoughts on locking classroom doors 10 to 15 minutes after start of church service? Classroom doors do have windows.
Yeah, so locking doors, closing doors, that may be fine if you have windows that you can still see through. Locking doors, that can become a real problem because if there was if the fire alarm got pulled or you had to evacuate something and somebody, the lock breaks or something crazy happens, there could be a lot of liability associated with that. So I don't recommend necessarily doing that. But certainly if you have windows in the doors, just keeping the doors closed, that's great. We actually at our church we're in an old office building. And so we had one of the guys in the church came through and just cut windows into the doors themselves, just like little long windows, so that you can kind of peek in and see what's going on. So I wouldn't lock a door, or I certainly wouldn't lock a child into a classroom unless there was a lockdown issue. Right. That may be part of that overall procedure, but just as a normal thing, I probably would not do that. Closing the doors, sure, but not locking.
Excellent question. Okay. Dawn asks, what do you do when visitors come and parents are not there to establish an account? So visiting families.
Sure. Yeah. So there's a couple of different things you can do. The check-in system itself can operate in an attended mode where you may have an attendant that can kind of help collect information and put a new visitor in, for example, and kind of walk them through the process. Or it can operate in a standalone self-check-in mode, for example. So a lot of times within a church, it's a great opportunity just to kind of help a new visiting family feel welcomed. If you have a visitor check-in station, for example, and a lot of times you can get a student to kind of help out and help put information in. But honestly, the amount of information that KidCheck needs to get a new visitor in is very, very minimal. I mean, we really designed it to be like a 30-second process or less. And you can dial it up and dial it down if you want to try and ask them for their full address and all that kind of stuff. But really, the only thing you need is their name and a phone number and an email address. And if you put that in there, the system will send them an email with links to fill out the full profile once they kind of get back home. And then as soon as they do that, you guys have all that information as well. So trying to kind of reduce any kind of burden during that visiting time. So
that's great. Yeah. So the next question comes from Lucinda, and she says, for the custody issue, where a parent does not want a specific person to pick up a child, where do I find the code to add onto the guardian tag? And can we prevent someone without a legal order of protection, I assume, from picking up the child?
Yeah. So the idea with the authorized guardian lists, a parent can go through and in their profile they can set up a list of here's people that are implicitly authorized to act as a guardian. And then anybody else really on the planet should not be able to act as a guardian at all. But sometimes they want to call out a specific individual. This person should not be a guardian. So they can add them to their guardian list, and then they just switch them to be an unauthorized guardian on that list. There's just a little button they click. And what'll happen is that'll highlight that guardian in the admin console as you're looking through that information, as well as it'll print off on the child's name tag. It's a little, it's like a little warning triangle basically in the bottom corner. It's the bottom left corner of the name tag itself. So that as you're looking at that child's name tag, you can see, oh, okay, this parent has added a specifically unauthorized guardian on there. So that if somebody walks in to pick the child up and doesn't have a guardian receipt, for example, you can use the admin console to look that up really fast and say like, oh, okay, there's, this person, Mr. Bad Guy can't pick up the kid, for example, and you'll have immediate, know immediately what's going on with that.
I love that feature. I think it's great.
The nice thing too is that that each person that drops off a child or checks in a child can have a different authorized guardian list. So, for example, if you have a parent that mom can have her own list with her own people on there, and if she's divorced from dad and dad drops off the child, he has his own separate list that goes active when he drops the child off. So they can both maintain separate guardian lists and and kind of keep that custody chain when they're the ones that are actually the primary guardian. That's
really a smart design. Last question from Dale. He says, what is your thought about cameras in the classroom?
Cameras in the classroom, I don't think are a bad thing. It's just one more piece, one more security aspect, just to make sure that if there's ever an incident, if there's ever a question about something that comes up, you've got that video to kind of show what's going on. It also helps you uncover things that shouldn't be happening in the classroom. So there's some really, there's some very inexpensive cameras out there. The ones that I use, we actually use here at our office, is from a company called Ubiquity. And the cameras are all they're full HD, and you can access them anywhere. They're really good, and they're pretty. I think they're like $60 or $70 a camera, so they're pretty inexpensive. But there's a ton of different ones from Netgear and a lot of different companies that you can kind of leverage. So, from that standpoint, I think it's a great thing, especially showing like common area rooms and that kind of stuff is really, really important.
That view is very important, especially for minimizing any bad behavior.
Yeah, totally.
Well, that is all the time we have. We've gone over a little bit. Thank you for those who stayed with us, and we hope we got all of the questions. Yes, thank you for all of your amazing questions, and we'll look forward to hopefully visiting with you at the next webinar.
And if you have additional questions that we didn't get to, I apologize. I know there was a ton of questions that came in, so we certainly didn't get to everybody. But if you have a question that you want to talk to one of us about and get some additional feedback, you can just send us an email. You can just send it to info@kidcheck.com. And we'll get back to you as soon as we can.
Absolutely.
So thanks again, guys.
Thanks again.